Last up for our metabolism, we're going to talk about temperature regulation within the body. So we'll take a look at how we're regulating body temperature. We are warm-blooded, so we produce our own heat, and we're able to maintain our body's temperature at a set point. And so our normal metabolic processes are going to be produced by, or are going to produce essentially all of our body heat. And so normal cellular metabolism gives us body heat. In general, all of that breakdown of the chemical bonds, all of those catabolic reactions are generally producing more heat than we actually need. And that's not a bad thing. That allows us to maintain the body temperature regardless of what is going on around us. So even if it's cold outside, we have the ability to maintain that heat. But we do lose heat and we also gain heat from our environment as well. And so with that, we have the potential where things can give us heat through what we call radiation. And so radiation is where essentially just within the environment, we're giving heat off to other things. Just ourselves being in the environment, we're giving off this heat that's there. If you have ever seen an infrared camera or a thermal camera, a FLIR, and you see the image, if somebody is really hot, just like on, say, a cartoon, you're going to see those heat lines coming off of them. And so they're radiating heat out to them, and they're able to give that heat to other things. And so we're able to give off that just by simply being near them. And the same thing goes for us receiving heat from things like the sun. And so all of that, you're sitting out in the sun, and it's warming you up. It feels good. It's radiating heat onto you. Same thing happens when you sit next to a fire. We can also lose heat just by simply touching things. And so we can do this through what we call conduction. And so we have a process where we can gain heat. So here we have a little heating pad. That little heating pad, through conduction, it's hot, it's touching our skin. It gives us its heat that it actually has. Or we can take that heat away from us by having a block of ice or a snowball in our hand. And our heat is going to be transferred over to the cold object that's there. And so conduction requires us to be touching the other object itself. Next, we can have convection, and convection is similar to like having a convection oven. The big difference between a regular conventional oven and a convection oven is just simply that that convection oven has a fan. It's circulating the air around inside that oven. And the same thing goes for ourselves. And so we can transfer our heat. So if we were to put a fan up and blow wind towards that person as that fan is running, that's going to allow us to cool the person off. And so that cooler air that's moving past the body carries away the heat from the body with it. So we have convection transfer. Next up, we have one of our ultimates as far as the body goes, as far as getting rid of temperature, is that through evaporation. And so when we think of evaporation, most of the time people think about sweating. And sweating is one of the ways that we do have evaporation. And this is where when we are too hot, we're going to put water onto the surface of the body through sweat. And as that water goes from a liquid to a gas, we're going to then be able to carry away the heat with it. And so the heat is carried away and we lose our temperature that way. So our temperature starts to fall down. But we also have evaporation through other things. As I talk, I'm losing moisture as well. My respiratory surfaces, because especially here, I'm not just breathing through my nose anymore, I'm now speaking through my mouth, and my mouth is not really geared towards reclaiming any of that fluid that is being lost in my breath. So I lose all of that moisture that I had humidified all the air going into my lungs with. We also lose it through, in terms of the skin, our skin just simply starts to dry out, especially in winter times. The indoor environment has a relatively low humidity typically, and that humidity is going to kind of suck the water right out of us. And so we're losing it that way. Other ways that we have not truly evaporation, but ways that we lose heat through water loss, are things like just urine and feces. So heat transfer comes in many different ways. If we look at it kind of all together in one shot, we have conduction by the things that we touch. And we've seen this before, or you've experienced it. If you're watching a TV show or something and you don't save your seat and somebody comes and sits on it and then you kick them out, when you come back, your seat's all warm. They've kept it warm for you. And that's been through conduction of their body heat transferred into the chair itself. If you happen to have a fan on at the same time, we're going to get convection. And so we're either going to, if the fan moving out has a heater with it, so if we have some sort of means of heat inside here that's going on, and we're pushing heat towards it, that can warm our body, and that can also bring about our cooling if we get rid of that heat source that's inside there. So we can cool through convection as well. Evaporation, so she's doing some stretching there, she's exercising, she's sweating, and so the moisture evaporates off, and we have that component there. Radiating, just around the body, that temperature of the body, which is greater than that of the room or the environment that they're in, that's going to mildly raise the temperature of the environment. And so it's radiating heat. And so that allows the surrounding area to start to heat up simply because of that temperature difference between the body and the surrounding environment. In controlling body temperature, the hypothalamus is our thermostat. And so if you think about the body as being kind of a big HVAC unit in a sense, the hypothalamus is the thermostat itself. This is where we're going to control the body's set point. And so that set point is going to be constantly monitored by thermoreceptors. So we've got to have this in different areas. Unlike our house, where usually most houses only have a single thermostat, that means that that area of the house where the thermostat is going to maintain that temperature. But you may have other areas of the house that have either cooler or warmer temperatures as well. But with our body, we want to try and maintain a relatively constant temperature. And so we have centrally located thermoreceptors. This is basically giving us our core body temperature. And so these are in places like the hypothalamus, in and around the central nervous system. Our internal organs are giving us an idea of what our core body temperature is. And then we also have peripheral receptors. And so we have peripheral thermoreceptors that are just simply on the surface of the skin. So when you touch something, you can feel whether it's warmer or cooler than your skin temperature. And so as I touch my table here, I can feel that it's slightly cooler than my body temperature. But the area where I was already touching, it's actually feels warmer. And especially if I kind of get in between where I was touching where I wasn't, so that conductive change in heat from my body to the table has occurred. And I can even feel the difference kind of where that ending point is, where I had already warmed up the desk here. That's there. And so that sends information back up to the hypothalamus as well. So we're getting information from internal body temperature, deep places within the body, as well as the superficial areas of the body as well. And depending upon what we have for the temperature, if our body temperature rises, and so if our body temperature is going up, we're going to bring more and more blood up to the surface of the body. We're going to try and radiate more heat away from the body, as well as combining that with secretions from sweat glands. And those sweat glands are going to put fluid onto the surface. Some of those sweat glands secretions are going to evaporate off, and we start to cool down. But if we're too cold, now we're going to take and pull those blood vessels in. And so we go from a dilated blood vessel to a constricted blood vessel. And we've pulled that blood deeper into the body. And as the blood comes deeper into the body, That then conserves it. We radiate less heat out. We're definitely not sweating anymore, so we're not going to be evaporating as much fluid either. And if body temperature drops enough, we may even start to shiver. And so our skeletal muscles, especially the larger skeletal muscles, are going to start to contract and relax uncontrollably. And as we use muscle, as we've seen before, this generates heat. We're breaking ATP bonds, the muscles themselves are working, and this is going to start to generate heat as well. When it comes to our body, we can see signs that our body is either trying to keep us warm or keep us cold or cooler, depending upon kind of the reaction on the surface of the body itself. And so the skin is kind of our biggest radiator, conductor of temperature that we have within the body itself. And so the blood is going to be able to alter its flow there to the surface or away from the surface in order to control that. And so that's where when we look at the skin here, we can see that the skin in somebody who has a higher body temperature is going to be flushed. Somebody whose skin is colder is going to look more pale. And that's because of that movement of the blood in and out of those capillaries that are just beneath the surface of the skin. And so when we're cold, we want to conserve that blood flow away from the surface, and we're going to start to decrease the amount of blood that's available at the surface of the body. Versus when we're too hot, we bring all of that blood up to the capillaries, we bring it out to the outer edge of the body. We try and cool off through radiation, through evaporation, and through conduction with our environment that is there. We may even try convection by getting in front of a fan, having somebody fan us, things like that. Sweating and shivering is our body's next kind of step. And so in addition to bringing that blood flow to or away from the surface, we're going to combine that with evaporation. And so when we sweat, and we sweat all day long, our sweat glands are kind of always producing, but sometimes the sweat becomes excessive and we're trying to get more and more evaporation. And that's going to help to bring the body's temperature down. When it gets too cold out and we've been outside for too long, our body's muscles, especially those larger kind of core muscles, are going to start to contract and we're going to get shivering. We're going to pull the blood deeper into the body. So we're going to vasoconstrict along the surface of the body, and we're going to allow for that blood to stay in and near the core rather than allow it to do any kind of radiation or conduction out at the surface. Our body's temperature set point can be affected by hormones. And so hormones that are going to increase metabolic rate or decrease metabolic rate have the effect of either increasing temperature or decreasing temperature. And so one of the biggies is thyroid hormone. And so thyroid hormone is going to be kind of more of our long-term hormone for doing just that. Epinephrine can be more short-term. Depending upon our stage in life, things like growth hormone and testosterone have that same effect of increasing metabolic rate. But thyroid is kind of our general metabolism rate setting hormone. And so if thyroid hormone is elevated, we're going to have an increase in metabolism. And by that, we're going to have an increase in temperature. So somebody who is hyperthyroid is typically going to have a high metabolism. They're going to oftentimes be thin. Somebody who has a hyperthyroid is oftentimes going to be warm. They can't cool off in a sense. Everybody else is comfortable, but they're sweating in a sense. Their metabolism is just running and running and running. Someone whose thyroid hormone is too low, their metabolism is going to be reduced, and their temperature is going to be reduced. So in a hypothyroid type of a person, they're going to have a sluggish metabolism. They're typically going to gain some weight. They're going to be cold all the time. Anywhere they go, they're going to be looking for a sweater, a blanket, etc. They're trying to keep themselves warm simply because that metabolism of the body is not functioning well enough to keep them warm all the time. In addition to hormones that work, in a sense, on a daily basis, at times we get another type of hormone that gets released when we are sick. And so fever, generally associated with having some sort of an infection, we've got the inflammatory process going, and this is going to cause our thermostat to be turned up. So we've got some sort of infection. We send our macrophages over to try and destroy whatever it is that is infecting us. And those cells, the macrophages, release substances called pyrogens. Those pyrogens then cause the tissues to release prostaglandins, and those prostaglandins go up to the hypothalamus and say, turn up the temperature. And so our fever goes up. By raising the fever, this leads us to increased metabolic activity. So our metabolic activity goes up, which means that our macrophages can work faster. We can destroy the infection even faster, and we can regulate our temperature there. Once that infection is gone, then the release of pyrogens decreases, prostaglandins decrease, and so our temperature then comes back down to normal. And that'll do it for our metabolism. See you next time.